had been a golden afternoon, and I remember having the familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer and summer.
This idea that, like, nostalgia as a commercial means, and they're like, why is this failing? And it's like, well, we say we want nostalgia, and it looks like we want nostalgia. But then when we get it, it's really just not that interesting. It's not telling us anything new. It's not giving us anything new to think about. It's just rehashing something that wasn't that interesting in the first place, but it was interesting because of its proximity to other memories.
I think overall it is working, though. I do think that you are seeing enough success with movies that are tapping in nostalgia that they're going to continue to double and triple down.
Always, well, and
so
we're going to have like nostalgia of today's nostalgia in like 10 years. Like, there's less original
let's
content
hope so
now.
that there's enough original content.
Well, no,
where there could be nostalgia
that's what I'm
in the
saying.
future.
So is there like nostalgia of the copy?
Right. And that's
Like,
and I think that
it's like how people prefer the prequels to the originals
absolutely,
because they're from a different generation.
100%. And I just took my daughter to see the 25th anniversary re-release of The Phantom Menace, and I do have a better appreciation for those movies, even though at the time I wasn't like, these fucking suck. No. But I was like, oh, that's different. And that appreciation, we're not going to go into Star Wars stuff, developed because I was watching all the subsequent material, the Clone Wars cartoon, and all the different stuff that came after those movies, and it really helped me develop an appreciation. Now, I am definitely drawn to nostalgia. I see probably slightly more movies that are sequels to something, especially an older movie. Just slightly more of those than I do original movies like we've seen in the past, The Zone of Interest, or, whatever, independent or more less commercially focused movies that are out. And some of them I've really enjoyed just because it's both nostalgia and it's just fun, pure entertainment. For example, I saw Top Gun Maverick twice in the theaters.
Yeah.
Maybe even 3 times.
Yeah.
And one was
had so much fun with it.
Yeah, it's just such a blast. One was with my daughter, one was with DJ, and maybe a third time with somebody else I can't remember. And for me, it was an escape into something that I watched a lot when I was a kid. Top Gun was on VHS over and over again at my house. I played the Nintendo game, the theme music, all of that stuff triggered goosebumps and watery eyes and all the good feelings. And I do think it was a really well-made, that kind of movie.
Yeah.
Incredibly well-made. My daughter loved it. She thought it was like just an awesome experience, both with the sound design, the visuals, the pacing, the action, all that stuff. So I get into the nostalgia for sure. Here's what I think is really the bigger element of that. It's not that the movie studios and the filmmakers are excited about nostalgia. I think some of them are. The producers, I think the studios and the people that actually make these decisions just go, look, this is less risky.
Oh,
we are
100%
trying to invest everything in first of all, where the attention is and the stuff that we can make that presents the least amount of risk.
You can't build models off of something that doesn't exist. And no, like the thing that these studios love most is a good revenue model.
Right. And so they're going to harvest all of these movies from the past, especially with, listening to potentially a vocal minority, but listening to what goes on in social media and things they see in memes and stuff that comes up in the popular culture or the zeitgeist. Movie coming out this summer that I think a lot of people are going to be excited by. And I think, honestly, it is going to do well box office. And I think it's going to continue to reinforce Hollywood's instincts that these nostalgia trips are a worthwhile investment, is the new Twisters movie. There's another Alien movie coming out, Alien Romulus, that's coming out. Guess what? I'm going to be there that weekend to see it because I watched Alien and Aliens and even Alien 3. I saw them in the theater. I am also someone who's very sentimental and romantic about that stuff. I like feeling like I've been transported back to being a 14-year-old kid again for 2 hours. I enjoy that. So it's tough because I know that I'm part of voting with my
Part of the
dollars
problem.
to
No.
reinforce the making of those things.
Certainly, yeah.
But I will say, just to wrap up my take on it, they are more often a miss than they are a hit for me. And I'll sit there and come away, even from like the Star Wars sequels that came out, I'll come away from them going, man, I feel good. I heard the music I love. I saw the ship that I love. I heard Chewbacca make his sounds, you know, I heard the sound of lightsabers, all that stuff. And then I'm like, wait a second, that movie fucking sucked.
Yeah.
And
It's not teaching you anything new. It's not giving.
well, you know, without going into everything with the sequels, you know, there's, you know, after watching them several times, listening to video essays, really kind of assessing, you know, my take on it, and also doing sort of a self audit, like, how do you really feel about this? You know, there's just a whole host of issues that I have with the people that were, you know, held custodian of George's vision, and what they did with the sequels, especially to Luke Skywalker's character, which I think is an absolute travesty. At the same time, though, I have enjoyed, you know, The Mandalorian, watching that with my daughter. And when, spoiler alert, at the end of season 2 or 3, whatever it was, Luke Skywalker comes back and saves the day, I literally, dude, was crying. Yeah. I am just like, this is the most 14 years old I have felt in my entire life, next to maybe seeing Jurassic Park in the theater with my daughter. And it just, in a good way, completely gutted me.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to describe it, but it was an amazing feeling, and I certainly would chase after that again.
Yeah. That's so interesting too, how we make, like, I don't really have a lot of theatrical, I definitely sometimes go back to, you know, I don't know, like, I guess part of it is you have to, like, I have moments where it kind of takes me back to childhood, but then I kind of have this thought, like, well, I'd rather be here than there. Like, not that I had like a terrible childhood or anything. I'd rather be here than there. I mean, I definitely still throw on like I used to watch the Batman and Spider-Man cartoons, the 90s Batman and Spider-Man cartoons,
love those
constantly. And so now I mean, I always throw those on.
Yeah.
I told you, I used to watch like the Jetsons and the Flintstones.
Yeah, me too.
Throw those on. Because they're all on HBO now. Yeah. The old Scooby-Doo, like throw that on. I still love those cartoons. I'm very excited to like have kids and watch with them. But at the same time, like, I don't have this. Like, sometimes I'll rewatch things from my childhood, and if it doesn't stand up, then I'm just like, oh. Yeah. And so I've almost guarded myself to that, where I won't rewatch things. Right. Like the Batman cartoons, I knew those. Like, I first of all, I had very good memory. I've watched a lot. I obsessed. I read the books and stuff like that. But like, I knew that was critically like well done. Not that critical, whatever matters, but I just knew it was well done. I knew it was dealing with deeper themes, and it would still be interesting. It still is interesting as an adult. Yeah. Some of the stuff is corny, but what's not, like, but something like I made that mistake too many times where like I revisited something. Yeah. It didn't hold up. And it didn't hold up. So I almost like to live with the memory of it being better. I think than it is. Yeah. Than to revisit like Star Wars. I mean, I totally remember, and with me, it wasn't, in the theaters, obviously, but it was, on the VCR, down in the box fort that I built in my dad's house. Like, I'm in a bunch of boxes and there's a TV, and I've got the Star Wars cassette that we picked up at the video store, and it's the first time I've seen it. Like, vivid memories. Or like over in the corner and he's watching like a fight and I'm watching Star Wars for the 6th time. Like, those are my memories of it, and very fond memories. I just remember the first time, watching the first 3 and then watching the prequels a couple of years later. I remember, getting together with a bunch of friends to go see the third one or whatever.
Yeah.
The second one, but like I don't see that as, maybe I'm just not as like, I don't have as much of a romantic.
It could be,
take on
yeah.
it.
That just your, you know, the emotional and biochemical response when you watch those things. Just certain ones may not go to such a deep place, and there's certainly movies from my childhood.
It's funny though because I sorry, I'm not trying to completely hijack this, but like I love, like, you can ask anybody that knows me. I mean, I love to highlight experiences with, I call them like memory captures.
Yeah.
So whether that's taste, smell, sound.
Yep.
So like we were, I was hiking with a couple of buddies of mine in Yellowstone. It's the first time I've been to Yellowstone, or maybe it was either Yellowstone or Teton. But anyways, we were there and we're hiking, and one of my buddies was like, can we not listen to music? And I was like, that's fine, but I love to listen to music in moments like this because it allows me to revisit it at any time.
That's right.
Like whatever emotions I'm feeling right now, it gives me an access point to these emotions.
Yep.
And same thing with, you know, whiskey or with smells or with good food of some kind of taste. I love capturing memories. So it is funny that I'm not as nostalgic necessarily, because I do like that. That's essentially captured memory, right?
Well, maybe, you know, and I don't know if it happens for you on a similar or even same level. You know, for me, when I watch one of these old movies, especially in the theater, you know, it could be that an album that you were listening to during an experience, whether it was a hiking trip or a pivotal time in your life, you know, 1 year in college or whatever it was, that those are, you know, transport you through time when you listen to them, and you can kind of hear the leaves rustling. You can smell the, you know, the fire burning. You can, you know, whatever. I have that. My wife and I were just talking about it. This song called, I think it's Mountains Beyond Mountains, from the Arcade Fire's album Suburbs. And like every time I hear that song or that album, I'm immediately in my Mazda driving up the 2 to go to Pasadena or back to the Apple Store, because that album was on repeat.
Yeah.
Now, does it induce like tears and all that stuff? I don't think so, because the mechanisms of a movie are so all-encompassing for triggering emotion, from the score to the sound to the moving image, of course. And that chemistry, sometimes literally with film print, combined, is such a, I use this term fondly, an assault on your emotions, that it
and
just
I
brings
agree with
up,
that completely.
Whereas just an album, it will transport me in time, but it's rare unless it's a soundtrack to a movie, like the Henry V soundtrack. Great movie, by the way, Kenneth Branagh. My favorite Shakespeare play, Henry V. Speaking of Thane of Cawdor, which is Macbeth. That soundtrack is, the score has got to be one of the all-time great scores for a movie. And it has extra meaning to me because I attach it to my dad. My dad's dead. So when I listen to it, there's connections there or whatever. So movie scores do something to
I agree.
bring me back.
Like movies capture, and I mean, this is part of the reason why I love, you know, great films so much.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't necessarily get the idea of a sequel.
Yeah.
Unless there's still a story to be told.
Absolutely.
Godfather 2, there was still a story to be told.
Yeah.
I like that's, I know this is like the but like there was a story to be told.
It was a saga.
It's one of the best films because there was still, that character wasn't done yet.
Yeah.
And we needed to see the rest of that. Godfather 3, less of a story to be told.
Right.
It falls off a little bit.
Yeah.
Like I don't necessarily see, because with me, I think of It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah.
When you just laid out that description. I've watched that movie for, 25 years in a row.
That movie killed me.
And like, that is every time you cry at the end. Audrey, every year we make a thing of it. She's, cue Audrey crying.
Yep.
We go see, we see it in the theater every year. There's so many memories I can access, whatever. But it's like, I don't want to see It's a Wonderful Life too. I have no interest in that.
100%.
Like that is
or a remake of it.
Right. It's missing the point. Like, because the point is that is an emotional capture device, and it's doing its job. And if you want to re-experience the emotion, I don't want to see let's see how George Bailey develops as a character after. Like, don't give a shit.
Yep.
That he had a complete.
It's done.
It's done.
Leave it alone.
And you can go back and watch that. And that's kind of how I feel. Like, I almost wish, and I understand, like, there is this weird obsession that our culture has with continuing stories, even if they're completely fabricated outside of the original essence of the idea. But I just don't understand the idea of, like, we're going to pick up where we left off and, continue this person's story. Come get all the nostalgia. It's like, because with me, it's just like, why not, instead of making Jurassic Park 5, just rebroadcast the original Jurassic Park for a full summer run.
Repertory theater. and I actually wish that was what was happening, that they were taking their old titles and they were doing even a limited release nationally.
And you and I have talked about this before in cinema of, like, I want to see, I mean, we literally tried to do this with a Cassavetes film in 2020. Like, I want to see these amazing films taken, source material, take it, and give me another take on it. Yeah. Like, don't change it. And, like, some films do that. There's re-releases and things like that. But, like, give me another.
And you mean like a reboot, or they take the same property and do a whole different thing with it?
Do it again. Yeah. Kind of like, I mean, that would be more interesting than a sequel.
Right.
Because then, okay, is the material I mean, we opened the podcast, great synchronicity, talking about Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And I've seen,
that's true.
You go to see Shakespeare performances. I've seen Shakespeare performances where the actors and the director of the whoever the theater company, whoever's putting it on.
Right.
I'm like, did you read?
Right.
Do you understand what is, like, what Shakespeare is saying here? Do you understand? Like, do you know what this is, or are you just reciting the? And I've seen them where I'm completely moved. Yeah. Completely moved. Films, you can watch the same play performed by 3 different directors and cast, and it's completely different feel. So why aren't we doing that with these more contemporary titles? And, like, instead of giving me Star Wars, like, the 40th version of it.
New episode comes out June 4th. The Acolyte. Link in the show notes.
Give me, I want to see what the source material, how strong is the source material? Yeah. If it's revisited by a complete new set of artistic intention, what do we get?
Right. And I think sometimes for some of these properties like Star Wars, there's so much risk in mishandling it that even Disney, I think, and let's not spend a bunch of time on this, but even Disney is sort of like recalibrating their approach to it. Now, they aren't going to, sort of like cave to the whims of a very vocal minority, or even part of a fan base that I do think is toxic. But there are a lot of people in the fan base that are going, we don't think you understand how much weight and mass Star Wars has, and it's something that you have to be really careful with, that you're not just sort of making Star Wars stories, especially with legacy characters, just sort of on a whim. There's a real care that has to go into that, and they're in a hard spot with that property, because I think a sort of a sister property, in a sense, that's so coveted, is the Back to the Future trilogy. And Bob Zemeckis, Bob Gale, even Spielberg are all like, as long as we are alive, this movie will never get sequels. It will never get a reboot. It'll never get remade. Nothing. Now, they do have a musical on Broadway. I don't know if it's still running right now, but they did have a musical that came of it, which is a little bit of a different story. But I am glad with that property. I don't want there to be a new version of Back to the Future. I don't want there to be a sequel.
But
I don't want 60 years from now for somebody to make
the
a
original
new version.
though? Like, because I feel like that's almost more of a cultural like mirage. That like, you know, if it was open source and anybody could do whatever with it, like it doesn't. It's not reductive to the original. You know, the original still exists in its full capacity, and I think maybe that's a lesson we need to learn as a culture of separating. Like, the first Star Wars film is always its own asset. Like, it's always,
Absolutely.
it can be viewed. I can put it on right now and watch it, and I shouldn't be judging that through the lens of, well, there's this, this, and this, and I get it. You're protecting properties. There's like larger systems at play, but I think the way to view art is like, you know, I'm not going in and like, oh man, there was a terrible, you know, I listened to, you know, I don't know, like, pick anything.
Your argument is completely sound, and I completely agree with you. I want other artists, filmmakers, storytellers to be able to take those worlds and explore them in new ways. Here's where it gets a little problematic in my experience with some of these properties, especially when the studios who own the intellectual rights and all that stuff. There's something different when, and this kind of relates to Star Wars, and this would apply to Back to the Future and other franchises. There's something different when it's like canon.
Yeah.
Versus someone playing in that playground and making something that doesn't have the stakes of it being like canon. Now, we might be assigning meaning to something as being canon. Like, you guys just settle that.
Yeah, settle down.
Jesus. But there's something that hurts when Luke Skywalker is handled the way he was in that movie for me.
Yeah.
Knowing that that's it.
Yeah.
It's not going to be another way, because, you know, obviously they can have fan films and, you know, all that stuff, and that's wonderful. But there's such a like an officialness to it that is hard for maybe people on the outside looking
part
in
of
to
that,
understand.
Though,
but it's
part
just
of that,
like,
I'm probably speaking like blasphemy to a lot of fans, but like, is part of that just like, maybe that's the actor's responsibility to just be like, I'm not going to be involved in this.
Yeah, I wish he would have, because he tried like hell to tell them to push back from what
I mean,
what I understand.
I think Godfather is an interesting example, right? Like, you have the first two films, and then you have the third where they couldn't get the get the right cast. They couldn't, but now people like. Some people really like the third. I think the third is fine.
Yeah.
I mean, but does that
But it's
movie
hard when
not,
you've got 1 and
does
2.
that not living up to 1 and 2 take away from 1 and 2's absolute, you know, greatness? No, not at all. In my opinion. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I just, you said to settle down and like a minorly, that's kind of how I feel. I'm 100%. Just like, settle down. Like,
I get it. It's
because these are properties, and we're viewing it through the lens of our lifespan right now too. Yeah. But I mean, we're seeing this happen right now, where patents are expiring. IP is being passed into the public domain from pieces that, like, I mean, within the reasonable range of just like us doing this podcast, reasonable range, there's going to be some significant IP that passes in. Absolutely. There's going to be some significant patents that expire and IP that passes into public domain. Mm-hmm. You already seen it with Great Gatsby. I think recently passed into public domain. There was Mickey Mouse, and they made the slasher film, the Steamboat Winnie the Pooh. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like, put it out there. Like, let people use these properties, because I don't know. I think,
I don't disagree with that at all.
But part of me is also like, but come on, let's just develop some new properties.
Please,
let's stop acting like we need to continue to iterate on this.
I mean, I tried with one of my spec screenplays from almost 10 years ago, which is crazy to say, but it was what would have been considered a low budget, big budget movie, because it was contained and all that stuff. But I tried writing a movie that would be, a new sort of sci-fi action movie that would have been, very much drawing on my love of The Thing and Terminator movies. Not that they have the same things, but
You just reminded me. I told Audrey that tonight we would watch Terminator
oh shit,
1
yeah.
and 2. She hasn't seen them. So.
Oh man, what a good double feature.
Great night. Just turned into a better night.
So I tried, writing a movie. I don't think I'm glad the movie didn't. The Gatekeepers rejected it because I don't think I wrote it from the final execution was connected to the place where it came from. It turned into something else through all the different drafts and iterations and all that stuff. But part of why I think Gatekeepers may have rejected it was that what it would take to invest in the film to make it, and then to sort of teach everybody what it was through the marketing versus a sequel or a reboot where they don't have to teach you what it is.
The stakes are there. The
what
world
it
is there.
Yeah,
the
so
rules are
you
there.
already have a baseline understanding. So it's a shortcut to converting people from maybe not seeing it to seeing it.
Which speaks to the larger cultural idea, though, of we're just looking for shortcuts instead of doing the work to, like, all of these things took work to get people into the...
And it speaks to to me, the evolution of so much of what's made at the major studios in Hollywood to being all from a place of commerce. You talked about The Godfather, even Jaws in 1975, some of these other films that ended up being sort of blockbusters that really ushered in this focus on box office results over let's make a really great movie and then be shocked that it is running in theaters for a year or more.
This might age terribly. And this is, you talk about dating things and dating or whatever, and this might be the worst take ever. But I am interested to see how Megalopolis.
Yeah, me too.
Like when we're sitting at this table a year from now.
Yeah.
And we're talking about, what the same industry, like what is the industry, whatever, I'm interested of what that film's impact will be. And if it was just like, oh, this is a hype thing, I would understand.
Yeah.
But the track record is there. If anybody was going to do something that was like, hey, this is my swan song, I'm passing this torch, or I'm laying down this challenge to the next generation, pick it up or don't, it's here. Yeah. It would be Coppola. I mean, he redefined film 5 times. Yeah. 4 times. What? So you had Godfather 1, Godfather 2, Conversation, dual Oscar year. Yep. Apocalypse Now. Yep. I mean, he's just, and then his daughter has, has had an amazing career. Like, absolutely. If there's anybody who kind of is, you can't tell the story of cinema without, he's one of them.
Well, who could break this this zeroing in on commerce and nostalgia and low risk.
He has the reputation. He has the name value. He has the, he just has everything of like, I don't think somebody could come in from left. Of course somebody could come in from left field. Sure. But like, and then he has this idea like, oh, I want to spend $120 million of my own money to make a film with like this experimental style of cinema that, I'm pioneering. And maybe it's not some crazy, like maybe it's, but you don't hear a lot of filmmakers looking to what the future is going to be. What does the future look like? The future of this medium. Yeah. What is that? And so I'm excited to hear a master who's done it. Yeah. Who's made maybe 4 of the greatest films of all time. I'm excited to hear what he has to say about this is the future. This is what I want. I think the future could look like. Yeah. And just get other people talking about like what the future, but yeah, you talk about breaking that mold. And, I sent you the one review that got me pumped where I was like, this has no commercial. This is the most expensive film with 0 commercial ambitions I've ever seen. Yeah. And like, that gets me pumped. Like,
same here.
And then you look at the letterbox and it's just like a square. It is like as many 0-star reviews as there are 5-star reviews and like all of them in between. So I'm just like, okay. Cause you think back to some of his, like, I'm sure I would, what did Apocalypse Now, if that was in a letterbox world, what would that look like? Yeah, absolutely. What would The Godfather look like? What would The Conversation look like? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I'd be curious. I don't know how
This take might age super poorly.
I don't know how polarizing those movies were when they came out. I could see maybe the conversation being a bit more polarizing than Apocalypse Now and The Godfather. It's tough because I feel like Megalopolis, just from watching the trailer, is just more bold, maybe a little bit more experimental, maybe a little bit more out there. And I think you get a little bit of that between Apocalypse Now and The Godfather. The Godfather, and I hope this doesn't make me sound stupid, to be honest, but it's just like straight up storytelling. It is just a family, and this happens, and he does this, and then this person's betrayed, and this person's murdered. It's a little simpler to digest.
I think there's like the themes are strong though, like power corrupting. You have this idea of like generational drop off of like, one generation loses the ambition that the previous generation carried. I think there's these ideas of like family conflict.
100%.
Like I think there's deeper themes at work in the movie.
And I'm not trying to make it sound like The Godfather is a simplistic movie.
Oh no, for sure. But I mean, I would even give you though, with what you just like, you watch Godfather 2. Yeah, it's a different level. Sure, the writing's a different level. Yeah, in terms of like, you talk about like Shakespearean. Yeah, and like it. Yeah, I would. And I would say that.
Apocalypse Now has a lot more. Much more poetic. It's much more like at first glance, like I'm not quite sure how this relates. These moments like Duvall's fixation on surfing for like 30 minutes of the movie.
Who's the writer for Apocalypse Now? Because I know I just remember either watching a documentary or reading like something about. But I mean, he was like I know he could just flow into styles of writers. Yeah. Like he could do Melville, or he could do like. If you can just flow into Melville, right, you're talented. Yeah, right, you're a talented writer. Like,
but for me, ultimately, if you show me the Godfather on VHS and Apocalypse Now on VHS, not to destroy the original aspect ratios of those films,
flying through the.
I think I'm going to go for Apocalypse Now just because.
Is it because it's more of an open? It's just experience.
Yeah, there's stuff that you just kind of. It's just not as easy to nail down. It's a vibe. It's more poetic.
Those are the most rewatchable.
Yeah, I mean, and that and my hope is that Megalopolis is evocative of that. My biggest fear with that movie is it's very didactic. That it's going to be hitting me over the head with what we're doing wrong and what it's going to cost us. And I'm just very worried.
I don't think it will.
I don't think
I could be wrong.
I hope it's
but
not.
I don't think it will be.
I don't think.
I mean, trust me. My radar is as high on that as my like. I mean, I think there's even there's movies that most people are like, oh, that was fine, and I'm like, I fuck that movie. Like,
if that movie has that sort of
and
lyrical,
that's why I kind of said like, hey, this could age poorly because there's a chance because similar vibe from the trailer where I'm like, I could watch this and I might be like, I hated this. I hated everything about this. So, but. No, I'm with you. I think anything with a more poetic nature has more of a runway. Yeah. All of the movies that I love revisiting, typically,
absolutely for me too.
More. I mean, but It's a Wonderful Life. We just talked about that. Like that is as straightforward as it gets.
I know there's something about something like It's a Wonderful Life, like Star Wars. These movies that the archetypes and the connection to our primitive emotional state, and then the music.
I would make the argument for Godfather that it kind of fits into that with this idea that there are a little bit of like,
and I would agree,
a little bit more of a thematically rich,
absolutely.
Subtext.
But with The Godfather, you've got it all too. You've got the performances, you've got the soundtrack, the music, all of that stuff. I mean, I was just watching. On VHS, of course. Once Upon a Time in the West. Have you watched that Ennio Morricone documentary?
I haven't.
I'm like, I was just watching.
I'm a big Ennio
I was watching
Morricone
the trailer, and I'm like, feeling all the feelings, especially Once Upon a Time in the West, which is a movie I came to late in life, and
Well, it's interesting because those Leone westerns almost they introduce the a more poetic quality to the filmmaking than what they they do the Western. It's a pretty straightforward Western.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, it is, good guy, bad guy.
Yep. Yep. All the archetypes.
Good guy, bad guy, medium guy.
Yep.
Like, all the archetypes are there. In the Good, Bad, Ugly trilogy, you've got Clint Eastwood just being the badass. But through how they use the camera, how they use just let this breathe a little.
Yes, the time, the
it
patience.
Introduces a poetic quality that doesn't exist in other westerns.
Yeah, and it's so sort of like to me, it's like a clear poet. I can't
poetic,
say it. Clear poeticism. It's just poetry.
Yeah.
A clear poetry. And what I love too about Apocalypse Now is it's more ambiguous. It's more nebulous. It's more vibey. It's more sort of like, I don't know what this is, but I'm like,
Apocalypse Now is more like Whitman, whereas Once Upon a Time in the West is more like Bukowski. Yeah. So there's such an appreciation of that, and again, like Star Wars and It's a Wonderful Life, like they hit on those emotional cues and the tools of the filmmaking from the music. I mean, It's a Wonderful Life just being about Christmas, and then you're watching it around Christmas time, right.
Which is a whole other highly heightened, sensitive vibe to be in.
And it is. You talk about a masterpiece of screenwriting, and just like. It is. I mean, at the
100%,
it is 100%. Like it is buttoned up. It is done with craft and skill at an extraordinarily high level.
Especially because it's doing something very difficult. It's bridging 3 generations of this person's life.
Yeah,
right?
Frank Capra's
childhood.
Frank Capra's 2 shots too.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Pretty good.
I've gone on a little like. I've literally just. Those are nice. He's a master of that. Master of the 2 shot.
Yeah, so those movies connect up to those real powerful emotions in us, whereas a movie like The Godfather goes to some deeper layers. And I think also, and not that It's a Wonderful Life holds up a mirror to the darker aspects of our personality. Part of what gets me so emotional about It's a Wonderful Life is how I can often get caught up in the business of life and take for granted the people that are around me, especially my wife and my kids. And that movie, after having kids, hits on a whole other level because of the similarities between us. Perception of struggling financially, his hopes and dreams of exploring the world and living the life of a National Geographic explorer, all that stuff. And same thing with Star Wars. So much of that is connected to not only the archetypal characters, but archetypal emotions. And what I love, again, about The Godfather, it starts going under those layers. Yeah. And then Apocalypse Now, for me, goes even farther below
Apocalypse Now borders
those
on like 2001.
Yeah.
In terms of just like, you project, like, here's a canvas, project what you see. But I think it's interesting what you just said about It's a Wonderful Life and Star Wars, where it's like archetypal, but it evolves.
Yeah.
Time. It's like, I don't know, excuse like the corny metaphor. It's just what happens to be right here, but it's like time changes it. There are new flavors that are introduced. You catch something you didn't catch before. You see something new, or you just process it through a completely. I've processed that film now over the course of like 2.5 decades. Like, there are lenses. There are many different lenses that I've viewed that film through, and you might go 5 years where you're like, okay, I've seen it, and then suddenly the 6th year, it's like you had some kind of life-changing event or occurrence that happened to you, and it's like, it's almost, the movie is almost a mirror of, wow, this was a significant year. Yeah. Because it's different to me now.
Different,
And so it's almost like you're just marking off like the old height things on the door.
Absolutely.
Frame.
And to me, you're
like, wow, I grew.
For me, it's, every year I watch The Shining and have new experiences as an adult. And as the layers of the onion get peeled back on me, as I understand myself and my faults and strengths, same thing with these movies. I'm peeling back these layers of this onion. I mean, I just watched The Shining again this past year and had such a profound revelation of what I think it's about, or part of it's about.
It's gonna change so much when you rewatch it next too, because of all of the reading that we've done on hauntology and on
that movie being like,
I mean, it's
such a great representation.
I think of when I think about hauntology as like a concept, I think of The Shining, and I think 100%. Of like Tarkovsky.
Yep.
I mean, it is in film. Nobody's done it better than that movie, and so it's going to change again for you, and that's why it's. If anybody was ever like, "Why is this? I don't get it." It's like that's why.
Yeah.
It is a living, breathing organism.
It is, and it's, to me, it's just like, how is this even possible? You know, again, I can watch Star Wars over and over again and kind of see new things and feel some new feelings, but you know, I'm like, I'm not really seeing this movie as something different every time I watch it, especially as it relates to me as a person and my experiences in life and the greater experience that we're all having in the world. And this movie, The Shining, just keeps revealing these things more and more. And that's part of why I'm gravitating towards Apocalypse Now, because I'm having similar experience with that movie. Literally going into the heart of darkness every time I watch it to mine it for more material. Yeah. And first time I watched it, which was in my undergrad, I watched Apocalypse Now, and then I was in a documentary class, and they showed us Hearts of Darkness. I never read the Joseph Conrad novel. I think I started it, and I ended up not finishing it.
We should like book club that thing, because I have literally picked it up at Jackson Street probably 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And then I put it back because I was like, you're not going to read that.
Yeah.
You've got too many books on the...
Yeah. And I've held off on getting new books too because I have so much to go through. But I literally watched that movie the first time, and I'm like, the horror, like, what the hell's this? This is dumb. Like, where's how come the Death Star didn't explode? What are we doing here? Dude, now that I've watched that movie or had it on in the background dozens of times.
Well, that is peak art for, if I were to define what is art. That movie teaches you something new about yourself every time you watch it.
That's exactly right.
And that's what great art does.
And The Shining teaches me something new about myself that I'm terrified of.
Yeah.
And
I mean, and I think you're going to go back and watch it through this newer lens, and it's going to teach you something like, even broader. Yeah. Because suddenly you've unpeeled everything to where it's no longer a commentary on yourself as like a self. Yeah. Or like an entity, but it is a commentary on like cultures moving beyond and returning.
And to me, really the high watermark for what a true horror movie can do. Now, I love a good just sort of slasher movie or something that's just a little bit more on the surface, entertaining horror as much as that can be. That movie really holds a mirror up to some people's darker impulses, especially people, I think, who are ambitious.
Well, would you classify Zone of Interest as a horror movie?
I wouldn't put it, like, if I was organizing that movie on the genre wall, I would not put it in the horror section. Is there an argument that it toes into that genre? 100%. And it is horrific.
It's also interesting too, because now reading, and this is non sequitur, but reading the Coppola book about live cinema techniques, and live cinema and its techniques, in thinking about Zone of Interest,
absolutely,
that was
with the hidden cameras,
integrating that live cinema,
absolutely,
and we didn't even think about it until
I had
so
no
that's
idea.
Very
it
interesting.
Felt like that, but I
wonder,
tried not to spend too much time going, how are they doing this?
Yeah, I wonder if Glazer and Coppola are connected, or I wonder if it was just like happened.
Because I was trying to be careful not to just follow sort of the technical stuff, but there were a couple cuts where like the dog moved and the cut between angles was perfectly matched with the dog, and I'm like, well, he's got to have 4 or 5 cameras running on this garden.
Yeah, you guys brought that up when we were getting drinks after, and I was like, what?
I know. Well, it just I wouldn't have noticed it if it wasn't for that cut, and I having obviously what I cut, I'm not cutting narrative, but I've done enough of it where when something cuts perfectly, like the dog's body is in the same orientation between camera angles, I'm like, you never see that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you got the old thing where, you know, there's an over the shoulder between two people. And like, if you watch the person who's not talking, you'll see their mouth moving.
Yeah.
And, you know, like
they had a scarf on in that last take.
Yeah. There might be little continuity stuff, but like, you know, there's all that kind of stuff going on. Those little continuity blips that, you know, you really have to have a close eye for. So anyway, but yeah, so I was like, oh gosh, they're filming this with multiple cameras all at once. And then I'm, you know, I didn't go into it, but I'm like, so they have like 4 or 5 cameras sitting on tripods filming this? Like, that's interesting.
But getting back to this idea though of, films feeding you. And,
absolutely.
Yeah. Like, I definitely.
Thanks for bringing me back on track.
No. You were making a point, and I interrupted with the stupid non sequitur of the live cinema, and I wanted to. I'm trying to find where we were because I wanted to hear you complete that thought.
We just talked about the horror movie and how how The Shining for me, as I peeled the layers of the onion, and each time sort of developed a newer and more profound understanding, especially because there's lots of similarities, I think, between my trajectory and trying to be a writer and sort of work in the arts, if you will, with Jack Torrance and the struggles that he has with focusing on his work while still earning a living and having a family, his narcissism, his
Matt started throwing
issues.
a lacrosse ball at the wall in the studio, and I was a little concerned.
Yeah. And yeah, it terrified me, you know, and we don't have to go into it too much, but just seeing that there are definitely times where I'm making stuff and my family gets in the way. I'm in my studio filming a YouTube video today, and I had to make sure that I told my wife and my daughter, I'm like, I'm going to be filming a video and I just want to try to get through it without any interruptions. Because if they walk upstairs, you can hear it really loudly on the floor, and it just messes up my focus and concentration. Just like when Wendy comes in to talk to Jack while he's typing. Whenever you see me typing,
and there's almost like a frustration too of, and this is really interesting about The Shining, that, and I actually weird because this happened this morning.
Yeah.
So, in The Shining, part of the thing I see is like he never achieved the vision of himself that he had in his head. And so you live with that over time, and it will deteriorate you. Mm-hmm. And this morning I was reading Steve Martin's autobiography, and the title is Born Standing Up. I'm only like a little bit into it, probably a quarter of the way through it. It's phenomenal. You got you have to check it out. I recommend anybody watching check it out. But he talks about his dad and his relationship with his dad. I love Steve Martin. I love Steve Martin's comedy.
Yeah, The Jerk is
found
seminal movie. For
we
me.
found The Jerk is great. Like we found the tape at the the store in Madison County.
Yep.
And now I've got it in the truck. But
oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I in the book though he talks about his dad, and at first his dad was kind of like always a little cold and whatever, but as time went on, his dad got very cold and detached and like not super like abusive, but kind of like emotionally abusive maybe. And there were a couple of like instances, one instance particular, but he talks about his dad always wanted to be an actor.
Yep.
And he never did it because of his family. And Steve Martin attributed that to like that coldness to a resentment that he started to have towards Steve and his mother.
Yep.
And his sister.
Yeah.
And it became very evident over time, like, at least that's how he lays it out in the book, that like that resentment. And so like, that's a big thing, right? You start to resent the people you care most about because you know, if you're not succeeding, you might attribute that to.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, The Shining, it's just a weird, I don't know. That was a connection that I just made, but yeah, that's absolutely what I see when I watch The Shining. Is like, so that resentment, like he's just taking it to 10.
Well, and I think.
But then you can also see it completely as a ghost story of like ghosts infiltrate, like generational trauma and things like. There's just, that's what makes it great. There's no one interpretation, but
Well, and I know, let's roll our eyes or take a drink every time I reference the line from Mad Men, but I really see him as sort of the result of doing what's expected of you versus what you want. And I think, with him getting the teaching job and having a wife and a son and all that, there might be some decisions that he made of what was expected of him. Maybe he had a long relationship with Wendy and he felt like, it's my duty to propose marriage.
I love the psychoanalysis of Jack Torrance.
I could spend all day doing it. And he's pursuing a career in writing because he knows at the end of it, if he's as successful as he thinks he's going to be, then he can essentially have the life of the Jack Torrance that we see in the photograph at the end of the film.
Why does he kill him? Because when he is when all obstacles are taken away and he's forced to focus on his work, does he have to confront his own inability?
Because ultimately,
or does he does not? He's just not a writer.
Ultimately, I think he's using writing to get to the life of the caretaker at the Overlook Hotel in the 1920s, parties and drinking and having a great time. I think that's the height of his needs as a human being, is access to alcohol, being completely unencumbered, meeting women and being with them. All of that stuff is what his truth is, what he feels his truth is. And the Overlook helps him achieve that. And that was, a really profound takeaway for me. Now, the difference, you talked about the Steve Martin thing where his dad wanted to be an actor and maybe, got cold to his family.
And I think Steve at one point in the book even references, I asked my mom, or my mom was always, she appreciated a more quality lifestyle.
Yeah.
That's not exactly how he described it, but the finer things.
Right.
And he's like, so I always thought that my dad had to give up because of that. But then he's like, later in life, my mom
clarified,
I always wanted him to be a star.
Yeah.
He was afraid to take
So for me, when I watch The Shining or hear you talk about, and we hear this all the time, where a parent had aspirations to be famous or rich or famous in an artistic way versus famous in a famous way, and they sort of stumbled into a family or maybe had kids when they weren't planning on it, that sort of thing, and then responsibility kicked in. For me, ever since I was a young man, 14, 15 years, not a young man, but a young kid, 14, 15 years old, for me, the family thing was always the first priority.
Yeah.
It was to meet someone I can spend the rest of my life with and have kids at some point. And for me, while I am incredibly driven and desiring of, success with what I do artistically, I'm not like Jack Torrance, where I would want the family to sort of hide, go to the curtains of the theater while I do all my stuff, or, hey, I'm going to go to this party all weekend. You guys, I want to include, they're my top priority. And that's something that makes me feel good when you talk about the Steve Martin thing or the Jack Torrance thing, that exists. Because for whatever reason, and I distinctly remember in acting school talking to some of my fellow actors, and I said, you meet the love of your life and you have your career. You have to pick one, because she can't go with you or he can't go with you or this or that or whatever. And they were all like, career. And I was like, no way.
Yeah,
the love of your life.
What are you talking about? Yeah.
And I think, some of them are very successful, been on TV shows, movies, stand-up comedy, all this stuff. And while I am successful, I am not at their level. Yeah. And they may be perfectly happy and content, all that stuff, not feel like they're missing anything. And that's wonderful. That's great.
And you hope they are, but I feel like a lot of times, one of these two things is more superficial than the other.
Yeah.
We are the wrong people to be giving this opinion.
Sure.
Because there is a level of kind of security on that end of things.
Yeah.
And a level of, I think there's a mutual understanding.
Mm-hmm.
It's this is obviously a biased side of the argument.
Yeah.
But I do think that, with me, I mean, it's similar of I've always thought there's some things that are more important in life than others. Does that mean that I just want to, I want to make things that I feel that are meaningful. And like, I want to make sure that I have an outlet to, you know, kind of use my voice or whatever that is, or like, you know, just carry forward these things that I appreciate so much, that have given so much to me.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want those to fade away. I want to do whatever I can to keep those moving forward. And I want to introduce future generations, whether that's just my kids or whether that's, you know, a group of people. But yeah, there's certain things where it's like there's like, if you have a very successful acting career, fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like most of the time you don't hear people that are looking back in their life and giving a summation of their regrets saying, man, I never was successful. It's usually like, man, I didn't, you know, the love of my life might have passed me by, or, you know, I never had children, or like, there's certain things that I feel like we are wired as humans to, that they're just more important. Yeah. From a human level.
Absolutely. And my mom told me, she doesn't remember this, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'm not fabricating this, but she told me...
False memories?
Yeah, she told me about an interaction she had with her dad, my grandpa, at the hospital as his health was declining and all that. You know, he said, you know, a little bit weepy, a little bit, you know, emotional. He said, I wish I would have spent more time with you kids. Now, my grandpa wasn't like, you know, a famous actor or, you know, whatever, but he was always working on stuff, always doing something with the house, helping his sons at their, you know, auto mechanic shop or some kind of big project or whatever where he wasn't spending more dedicated time with his kids while they were kids. Yeah. And I mean, I think about that phrase so much. Actually, just I got a composition notebook the other day, and I was, you know, reading these books, and it's just like, just a complete like avalanche of ideas and inspiration as I'm reading them, and I'm like jotting down sort of like poetic stuff or lyrics. I don't even know what it is. I'm just writing as these words come into my mind, and I titled the piece, you know, I wish I would have spent more time with you kids. And oddly enough, another essay that I wrote, or sort of a thing that I put out there on this composition book, speaking of ontology and technopoly and the books that we're reading, the title was You've Always Been the Caretaker. And it was a piece that I'm still going to work on it and figure out what it is. But it was, you know, hearkening back to The Shining. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I was getting a little sentimental, and all that stuff was sort of like these cliches of, you know, family is the most important thing, and, you know, all of that stuff. But, you know, I certainly know that at the end of my life, if I'm not achieving some level of success or artistic fulfillment that I think that matches in reality with what I think I want or am capable of in my mind, I'm going to set that aside when I look at my kids and my relationship with my wife, and that I worked hard to have a successful marriage that wasn't just sort of like, hey, we survived being together for 50, 60 years. You know, we had fun. Certainly we had our conflicts, but that we were always in love with each other. There was always a romantic element. There was always flirtation. There was always, you know, elements of romance, but then also elements of like getting down to business. How do we do this with money? You have a different approach. I have a different approach. What decisions do we make for our kids? What do we do to help them move forward without handing it all to them on a silver platter? All of that stuff. If I can, you know, look back on that and not say to myself, I wish I would have spent more time with you kids, which to me encompasses so much stuff. It's time with my wife, or I wish I would have been more present, or whatever. You know, ultimately, I think if I can say that to myself, that'll be a big win. Yeah. And if it's like, oh, I wish I would have traveled more, okay, I'm fine with, you know, wishing some of those smaller things. Yeah. But I never want to look back and go, I think I will always feel like, man, I would kill for one more day with Goldie when she was 4. Yeah. Like, I would give anything for that. But I'm at peace with what I gave to being present when she was 4 years old. I had to work. I had to make content. I had to go out and record podcasts with you on a Friday night. I had to do that stuff. But I never did it so much like The Shining, where if they walked into the room, I was ready to kill them.
Well, and I always think about like, this is like we get to sit here and do this.
Yeah.
Like this is this is great. This is a choice. And like we sit here and we talk about things, we work on projects, and we care about that stuff.
Yeah.
Like I am to the max passionate about that stuff.
Yeah.
But it's like, there are other things that matter more than like it just, and maybe that is, to some people, that is seen as a, they don't see it that way.
Right.
But yeah, I think that's something that we both kind of have a mutual understanding of that. And I mean, other people may not feel that way. And
and I want to make sure it's clear
open to feel that way.
Yeah, this is not, I
it's
certainly
not the
don't,
only way.
I don't want it to sound like there's any subtext in here of like, if you're someone that isn't wanting to have a family or even a spouse, that there's something wrong with you. I don't think that that's a universal path in everybody's life. I just knew from a very young age.
Well, I think
that was really
you only
important
get
to
one
me.
life. Like, this sounds terrible.
Good disclaimer.
This is gonna sound awful.
This is going to sound awful.
You only get one life, though.
Yeah.
And like, you have to choose the things that are most important to you. And like, there's no, I can't sit here and say there is some grand design that is more important, like where this value is held high in a higher regard than this value. You have to decide that for yourself.
Absolutely.
That there might be some kind of intuition that can help guide you through that, but like, if that's not like, if one value isn't as high to you, you have to respect that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it is what it is. I guess it's like, and that sounds terrible, right? Because anybody who disagrees with that is going to look at that and be like, that's not how I see things. Like that, there's only one thing, but like everybody's entitled to their vision of the world.
It had been a golden afternoon, and I remember having the familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer.